Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I had the pleasure of playing the Visions of Mana demo on stream last night. And as someone who has never touched a Mana game before, I have to say I'm very pleasantly surprised. I thought the trailers for Visions of Mana when it was first announced were captivating. The world looked beautiful, the gameplay looked inspired, and the game overall just looked really colorful and fun. And after playing the demo, yeah, it kind of reinforces those ideas. I think the demo was a bit up and down, but I want to get into it. The demo largely comprised of one really linear open world section with the mountain as the starting area, immediately followed up by a more open zone-ish design. If you're familiar with Xenoblade and how they tend to tackle zone design in these like segmented off open world chunks, it's similar to that. I think the demo starts off rather slow and kind of bland, but it really picks up as you continue to play. And that goes for every element of it. The music, the story, and the gameplay. You get access to a few side quests, one kind of significant town, but I don't think it's a major city or anything like that, and a couple of main story quests. I don't think the demo does a good job of introducing the main party or characters. It kind of throws a bunch of exposition at you, because the demo is at level 10, so I can assume we're starting at least a few good hours into the actual game. So the demo relies on telling, not showing for a lot of these characters. I'm not gonna read too much into that because we're missing a lot of necessary context for these characters. But the gameplay to me is one of the most interesting elements of Visions of Mana. It's an elemental system, but it also relies on a class system, to where, at least what I gathered from the demo, the way the game will work is that over the course of playing, you will unlock new classes for your characters, in the form of elements. Okay, so very basically, throughout Visions of Mana, you will acquire these elemental vessels. These are items. However, by equipping these items to characters, it will unlock the classes for those characters. By equipping the Wind Boomerang to, say, Val, you get Rune Knight, but if you equip it to the Catboy, you get a different class. But you can swap these items to different characters if you want to try different team compositions and different classes. You level up your class by spending resources and points you gain on a level up to unlock the next ability in the chain. It's not a skill tree or anything like that, it's a linear progression system that you'll unlock further access to later down the line when you unlock even more items. These classes give your characters access to various type of weapon archetypes they can utilize, or different armor, whatnot, as well as class-based spells. For instance, with the Wind Boomerang, by equipping it to Val, he unlocks Rune Knight that uses a giant two-handed sword, some rudimentary magic, but also enchants his weapon with elemental affixes for even more damage. And funnily enough, he also has a passive buff to where once he actually applies an elemental affix to his weapon, he gains a flat attack percent buff. So if an enemy's weak to fire, not only am I doing damage that the enemy is weak against, I'm also getting a massive attack percent increase by the properties inherent to a Rune Knight. The other elemental vessel you get access to in the demo is this like temporal globe that allows you to make use of time magic, and equipping it to the Catboy, which is the default in the demo, gives them access to, I think it's called Nightwinder or something like that. Basically, it's the rogue. He uses daggers and attacks quickly. But that globe gives you access to a spell that creates this temporal rift in a set location. Enemies that are inside this rift are greatly slowed down. However, if you are in the rift, you are sped up. It's a really good buff. And the Wind Boomerang, take a guess, you can throw the Wind Boomerang for some cool damage. You also get various ultimate style abilities that you spend your CS gauge on to be able to utilize. It's a system that seems really straightforward from the get-go, but over time you can acquire more abilities for more synergies between your party members. I think this system could easily be too restrictive in the long run, especially if one class archetype gives you multiple classes for each character that you really want to play with. I don't know if the game has a fix to that somewhere down the line, maybe they do. But I like the idea of being able to swap around various jobs/classes for these characters to get different archetypes and different elements and stuff like that. The gameplay itself felt really spammy and one-dimensional at the start of the demo, but as you unlocked more abilities, and at least as I got more used to the combat, I started to understand what they were really going for here. There's some rudimentary combos you can possibly make use of, especially on Rune Knight with Val. I figured out that if I used my standard combo, I just held the X button down using an Xbox controller. I held my basic attack down. He would do a 3-part combo, launching lighter enemies up into the air, but they would go far back a bit, so I couldn't really juggle them. However, if I had knocked them up against the wall of the arena where we were at, used the combo there, then the spacing allowed me to jump up in the air, hit him with a special attack Y button to slam them down onto the ground, and I got a rudimentary combo in. On top of that, you get regular spells as well, like Explode, which is just really cool. You shoot off a fireball that just explodes into multiple pulses of fire that can do really good AoE damage. But on top of that, you also unlock items that you can equip on these characters to give them spells they may not ordinarily have access to. So I gave Val the MC the ability to cast moon magic later in the demo. The customization seems really intriguing. Very simple on the surface, but I can see how this can really blossom over time as the game continues on. You combine these systems with the party member swap mechanic to where you can swap between one of your 3 party members in combat, but also the fact that the time can stop when you're in the menu to select what spell or item you want to use, and there's some really cool strategy you can invoke here. If you're familiar with Final Fantasy XII, with the Gambit system, there's a light form of that here as well, to where you can kind of give or modify the AI of your party members to say, hey, how many items left over for each item do you want us to keep? So if we have healing potions, do you want us to continue using them until there's only 2 left and then we stop? 4, 6, or do you just not want us to use them at all and have the onus on you to properly utilize them? This goes with MP management and just other elements of the AI, and I like that. This game seems as if it can get reasonably deep if you want it to be. Now granted, a lot of this, what I think is interesting, wasn't represented all that much in the beginning stages of the demo because the enemies you were fighting were really insignificant and they fell over rather easily. But if you continue playing, you'll find stronger and stronger enemies, challenge arenas, where I'm pretty sure the enemies scale to your level, so they're like 2 levels above you. And the demo caps off with a boss fight against a kraken on a ship. And playing against those enemies, the combat really started to shine, and I started to really enjoy it. Figuring out how to properly utilize my spells, the elemental weaknesses, the items in my kit, and various combos I had available to me, which is rudimentary ones. I managed to overcome that one elemental trial that scales to your level, and it was fun. And it came really down to the wire, but I did manage to take it down. And the Kraken fight, for being an early game boss fight, really impressed me. There were numerous mechanics involving the tentacles and it blowing bubbles at you. Abilities were clearly telegraphed. You had multiple ways to deal with them, either jumping over the tentacles, which I just never managed to successfully do, or you could run out. There's also another system in this game to where with projectiles that are launched at you, if you time your strike perfectly or correctly, you can launch them back at the enemy. This doesn't work for all projectiles, like it didn't work on the Kraken's bubbles, but I read that guide in the menu. And after looking at the trailers for this game after playing the demo again, with various different weapons and new abilities you can unlock later on, the combat seems really intriguing, and you seemingly get some really cool stuff. Like Val can get the ability to wield a lance and a giant shield. If you're familiar with Monster Hunter, yeah, it kind of looked like that. And in the trailers, it looked really fun. The combat can often be a pretty beautiful spectacle when it wants to be. I think the overworld was nothing to really write home about, but there were some interesting elements to it. One, it looked pretty despite being weirdly inconsistent with texture quality, but navigating the open world felt fine. You got a double jump and a mid-air dash, or just a dash in general, that you can also use in combat. There was one element in the demo to where, with Val, you could use your wind boomerang to create essentially an updraft to launch you up to a place you couldn't really reach before. And the trailers show that they expand on this system with things like being able to fly around, ride a giant, like, rocket or something, utilize a giant robot to break down pillars, rocky pillars specifically, it seemed really interesting and fun. And if I had any major criticism with the actual gameplay of Visions of Mana, it would be the side quests being very dull. At least the ones in the demo, they kind of just resorted to basic kill quests or fetch quests. There weren't much in the way of story or interesting mechanics to go alongside them. They're very rudimentary, and if you don't mind that, you'll probably be fine with them. But let's move on to the actual story, because the tone of the game was very upbeat and happy-go-lucky throughout most of the demo. If I had any major criticism of it, is that because it's a demo, I had no reason to care about any of the characters, so nothing really landed for me. There were a couple of funny moments, though. Also, the English VO sounds a bit weird in places, and the lip syncing is god-awful. And you combine that with character faces looking weirdly washed out at times, at least compared to the highly detailed clothing that the characters have. And it just makes the cutscenes feel really stiff and inorganic. But I will say, it's contrasted nicely with the interesting and varied colorful character design on the whole. And the world itself is rather pretty, especially the zones shown in the trailers instead of the demo. Because in the demo, we just had like a snowy mountain and a grassy, hilly plain area, right? The architecture was nice to look at, though, and the game is just rather pleasant. I will say the 30 FPS cutscenes are really jarring, especially on PC, which is where I played the game, where the game is regularly above 100 FPS on my machine, and then immediately going to 30 FPS cutscenes, and then especially on the water when you're in the boat, the waves are like 15 FPS or something. They don't look right. The visual presentation of this game can be weirdly choppy and just inconsistent on the whole. There's moments where it looks absolutely gorgeous, and then other moments where you think it's a PS2 game. If the story and gameplay are good enough, then I can be fine with that. But I think on the whole, the game is rather pretty. Going back to the characters, I think the characters, at least in the demo, can be really too upbeat and a bit too tropey at times. This could be deliberate because it seems as if the story on the whole is going to be rather emotional, with an overall theme of choosing to live. Basically, the premise of the game is that in order to keep the world functioning and not just fall into disrepair, you have to have these, like, sacrificial pawns, these alms, who represent each of the elements, who have to go to the mana tree to sacrifice themselves to preserve the world and to keep it going, until eventually down the line, more alms have to be chosen to go out and sacrifice themselves to the tree. The MC is kind of the guardian to these alms, and your party will be composed of various alms going to sacrifice themselves to the mana tree. So the theme of the game seems to be choosing between sacrifice and duty, or choosing to live and picking your own fate. Seems cool to me. I think the demo really started to get into it at the very end of it, but I think it's a fine line that they are walking between characters feeling too tropey and too upbeat to the point of it just being jarring more than anything, versus using that to contrast the more emotional story that it has going on. Because again, with this demo taking place later in the game, at least past some key critical character introductory scenes, it could just be that we're lacking context to really make these scenes work, which is what I think it is. I think overall, I'm walking away from the Visions of Mana demo rather pleased and optimistic about the game. It went from a game I'm keeping one eye open for to a game that I'm heavily debating picking up to play, because overall, I am really optimistic about the Visions of Mana demo. It was fun and interesting, and when I watched the trailers right afterwards, honestly, it kind of hooked me. With the game coming out in about a month, I'm not expecting any significant changes, right? But if the game continues on this trajectory from the demo, I think this could be a surprise hit for 2024. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!